Hi, my name is Christy, and I will be interviewing my Uncle Joe for my oral history project. And Uncle Joe, the first question I want to ask you is, what made you decide to become a police officer?
There were many reasons why I became a police officer, but the main reason was to protect and serve the public. Another reason was I wanted job security, which was really important to me, because as you know, I grew up and it was in a pretty much poor house, and most of my clothes, most of my things that I acquired were from my father's kid brother, who was 7 years older than me. And I knew I didn't want to live like that, and I wanted to make sure that I take care of myself and my family. So I knew going on the NYPD, that would change a lot of things, moreover, give me job security. And I knew that no matter what, my family would be taken care of should something happen to me. And that's the main reason why I went on the job.
Nice. How old were you when you graduated the academy?
21 years old.
21. That's young.
That was a long time ago.
It was. No, you're like 25 now. And when you became a police officer, did you always have a dog as your partner, or did you have another police officer?
Nope. I didn't acquire Nero until after I was on the job, almost 2 years. I had 3 partners, and my first partner, she was very important to me. She was a black woman, and she was born and raised in Harlem, and that was one of the roughest areas in New York City. That was in northern Manhattan. She was born in Spanish Harlem, which is about 5 or 6 blocks away from Yankee Stadium. And she grew up in the 2-5 precinct. And I lived out in Long Island, and I moved there when I was 10 years old. So basically, for most of my life, I grew up out in Long Island. She was street smart, and she knew the job, and she was on about a year before I was. So I learned an awful lot from her, and she was a very good partner. And then from there, I got transferred and went to somewhere else. And I had 2 partners in between getting Nero. And I knew I always wanted to work with the dog from a little boy. So when I was young, we never had dogs. And I used to bring home every stray dog that I found. Mm-hmm. And then one day, I found a German Shepherd out in the schoolyard. And I brought the German Shepherd home. And when my mom looked at the collar, she saw that it had a shield on it, and it was a police dog. So she called the law enforcement agency, and the canine officer that the dog belonged to came to the house. And apparently the dog got out of his kennel. So, and I was 10. I think I was 9 or 10. And he took me for a ride in his police car. And I sat in the front seat because the kennel was in the back of the car. And from that point on, I knew that someday I wanted to be a police officer and I wanted to work with a dog.
Was it a lot different working with a dog than with another officer?
Yes and no. Yes, I didn't have a human being backing me up when I went to certain calls that were dangerous. But I also knew that the dog could do the work of 10 of the best cops around, because dogs are very attentive. Their olfactory senses, which is their sense of smell. Basically, a dog sees and hears with their nose, and they're much more keen. And what happens is you can do things with a dog that you can't do with another partner. And you can search for items, you can search for narcotics, you can search for weapons, you can search for missing people, young children. Can't do that with a partner. So in some aspects, you're losing something, but you're gaining something else.
And that makes sense. And I know you were an undercover narcotics officer. How long into your career did you become that, and why did you choose to be an undercover narcotics officer?
Well, it really wasn't a choice. I was asked to become a UC, that's the acronym for Undercover, by my commanding officer. And at that time, I worked in Brooklyn South. Brooklyn South is made up of East New York, Brownsville, work in the country. We used to call it the armpit of society. Mm-hmm. And I was asked to work as a UC, and I wanted to do it because I knew it was a stepping stone in my career, because I had just entered OCCB, which is Organized Crime Control Bureau. So when you're a UC, it is very dangerous. You're often without backup, and your associates that you befriend are hardcore criminals, drug dealers, murderers, drug kingpins. And you have to earn their trust, and usually do that by starting at the bottom with the local drug dealers on the street. And as you make your buys, they become bigger and bigger, and then it gets to the point where you don't trust the local people and you want to see the people over them. And when you earn their trust, you work your way up. There's a downfall to all this, and there's a very thin line that you can cross. And you always have to make sure that you don't cross it. The longer that you're a UC, the harder it is to gain perspective on what's right or wrong. Because remember, you're one of the bad guys. You're working with them. You're with them all the time. So they expect you to do things that are illegal and against the law. And I knew the line that I couldn't go over. And most of the time there was two things. One, when I was asked to actually hurt somebody, I wouldn't do it, and I had to make up excuses. Or sometimes to gain their trust, they wanted you to do the drugs. So you had to be quick with your answers, and you had to answer them so that they would understand that. And I remember once being in a room right before I was making a buy with $50,000, they wanted me to do several lines of coke. And I simply said that I won't do that because I'm not a drug addict. I'm an entrepreneur. I buy and sell drugs for a living. And if I do this, then my mind won't be clear, and I won't be able to make my living as a drug dealer. So, and they accepted that. But sometimes it got to be pretty dangerous, because you're sitting in a room with a bunch of drug dealers, and sometimes they'll have their guns out and they're pointed at you and they want you to do something. So you have to be quick. And again, you don't have any backup. And you're not monitored. You don't have any kind of listening devices on you, because they pat you down, they check you. Sometimes they make you take all your clothes off, other than your boxers that you're wearing, just to see that you're not wearing wires or anything like that. So, but the main thing is that when you're so deep, sometimes you yourself as an undercover officer, you lose the sense of reality. You also lose the sense of what's right and wrong. And what happens is your supervisors at that point, they monitor you and they debrief you every time you meet with the dealers and the drug kingpins. And they have to make sure that you know and understand that you don't cross that line. And if they feel that at any second that you can't handle it mentally, emotionally, physically, then you're pulled. And that's pretty important. Sometimes they give you the leeway. They may want to pull you, and I remember twice they wanted to pull me, and I said, no, we're so close, because you're working so long and so hard, and you're spending millions of dollars of the city's money just to try to work up the chain so that you can lock up the kingpins. But the thing that you really have to remember is when you are pulled from it, then you get back to reality. And usually when you're pulled from a long-term undercover operation, they give you about a week off, and you have to go and talk to a department psychiatrist several times. They evaluate you to make sure that you're able to go back to work. And if you're not able to go back to work, you go on what they call long-term medical leave. You still get your same pay. We didn't have sick days at all. When it's job related, you still get your same pay every single day. You just stay home and you get the help that you needed. It never went past that for me. After 4 or 5 days, I was able to go back, into plainclothes division, narcotics division.
Yeah.
So, let's see, what else? Yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, that's very intense. I don't know if I could be in your shoes.
Some people can do it, and some people cannot do it.
Yeah. What are
when I was a UC, I was a UC twice. The first time I was not married and didn't have a family. And it's a funny thing happens to you when you're young and you're on a job. on the job means you're a police officer. That's the terminology we use. You think you're invincible. You think you're going to be able to clean up the streets of New York City, and not until you realize that there's 7 million people there at that time. Now there's 8 million people, and you're one of 30,000 police officers. That's never going to happen. Then all of a sudden, something else happens. You end up with a lot more responsibility, a wife, a son, and sometimes you have to take a step back and think that you don't want to do the things you used to do because it's pretty dangerous.
That makes sense. What are some of your best memories as being a police officer?
You know, that was one of the toughest questions out of all the questions that I looked at when you emailed them to me. It's a very hard question to answer. And the reason why is because a lot of the good things you do as a police officer, you don't actually see results. And they call this omnipresence. It's a deterrence. When you're driving around in a marked car or you're in uniform, you don't know the good things that you do because there could be criminals out there waiting to commit a crime. And if they see a police officer or a car, you might have stopped them from committing that crime. So that's a very hard statistic to measure. Sometimes making an arrest after the fact is a good thing, but to me, stopping a crime, I always felt was something that was even better than making an arrest, because then the crime never happened. I remember delivering 2 babies. One was right before I went into the K-9 unit, and one was after I was in the K-9 unit. I delivered two black babies, and one of them was in my car, and the other one was at the home. I thought that was wonderful. I really did. Actually, the first person that I delivered the baby, the woman had asked me if I wanted to be the godfather, and I politely declined,
Aww.
knowing that I would never see this woman or this baby again, and it wouldn't be responsible for me to do that. So that's kind of it. Unfortunately, the type of job we have, they don't exactly call us to happy occasions. We see what the worst society has to offer, so there aren't too many happy memories.
Well, what are some of the worst or scariest moments? If you want to talk about it, we don't have to.
No. Well, let's go back to the other question real quick. Now that I'm thinking about it, a very happy memory was the first time I ever saw Nero. He was about 8 months old, and I saw him in a kennel, and it was at Fort Totten in Queens, and that's where the K-9 training center was. And at that point, I realized that this dog was going to be my partner for at least a minimum of the next 8 to 10 years. And I knew in front of me the demanding task that I had going through the K-9 training program, which was 6 to 8 months. So to me, that was also a really good part and a great memory that I had on the job. And after I got Nero and we went through the training, in the time that I worked with him, we made over 600 felony arrests with 600 felony convictions. Most of the people that were convicted are serving 25 years to life.
Wow.
I do get phone calls from the parole board, usually when they're getting ready for parole, and they ask for my opinion on that, and I usually give them my opinion, and for the most part, they listen to me. And to this day, that I know of, nobody has been paroled that I arrested. And at that time when I was working, there were 7 million people in New York City. And one of the things that Nero specialized in was not only narcotic detection, but explosives. And I trained him myself for the black powder on explosives, and he was able to detect if people had guns on them. And for 2 years in a row, I led New York City in taking illegal guns off the street with Nero. And to me, that was a great accomplishment, because every gun I took off the street, that meant that that gun could not be used in a crime to hurt, to shoot, to kill anybody. And that was really, really important. And if you think about it, there was 1 million guns, illegal guns in New York City back in the 80s and back in the late 70s and 80s. And if there's 7 million people, that means approximately you can assume 1 out of every 7 people you see are carrying an illegal weapon.
Wow.
So I had the advantage with my dog, he could do the things that normal police couldn't do. Okay, now let's go. You asked me about some of the worst memories.
Yes.
This too was a hard question because I try to erase them and I can't. You don't even know this, but about 6 or 7 years ago, I was diagnosed with PTSD. That's usually what our soldiers get when they come back from fighting. And I didn't know this until I went and sought some help. PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. And usually soldiers get this, or people in high-stress jobs get this. There's no cure for it, you just learn how to live with it. And you usually show signs of that by having reoccurring nightmares. You can't sleep at night. You start reliving things that you did a long time ago, and they're vivid in your mind. So as I try to get rid of these, I can't. I just learn how to cope with them. But the things that bothered me the worst were crimes against elderly people, crimes against children, and crimes against animals. Those are the three things that bothered me the worst. I do remember once being in uniform responding with Nero to a domestic dispute. When I arrived, I remember seeing a little girl sitting in the corner of a room, and she had to be no more than 4 or 5 years old. She was sitting in a puddle of blood. The girl's mom was beaten pretty bad by her live-in boyfriend. I soon realized that this little girl was raped by her mom's boyfriend. I remember the rage that started to build up in my mind, and the anger, and I started I started to feel this, and I couldn't let it go. I remember calling all my supervisors, and I called the EMS to respond to take care of the little girl and the mother. And at that time, this took place, and it was in trying to remember where it was. It was in South Jamaica, Queens, and it was in a 4-family apartment building. And this was upstairs. There was 2 apartments, and downstairs was 2 apartments. And right before the supervisors and EMS came, and I was inside, the live-in boyfriend came. And he opened the door and started to walk in. And as soon as he saw me, he started to run. And I sent the dog after him, and Nero got him. After a little scuffle, and I got the cuffs on him, we were standing at the top of the stairs. And I realized what he did. And I had so much anger. I did something that I don't regret today, but it was definitely wrong. I pushed him down the flight of stairs, and he broke his arm and a couple ribs. Wow. Because of what he did. Like I said, he beat his mom really bad, and he raped this 4 or 5 year old girl. It was definitely wrong. I shouldn't have done that, and I got suspended for a week from the job without pay. Do I regret doing that? No, but this is some of the things that we have to live with, and that was one of the worst things that I think I ever saw on the job. He was convicted. He went to prison. I don't know if he's still in prison, but that's that one incident. The other couple things that were pretty bad was, let me see, I took 2 lives during gun battles in my tenure as a police officer. The first life, I was a detective, and I was in an unmarked car, and I was in Brooklyn. And a 16-year-old boy and his friend went into a liquor store and shot and killed the owner, the patron, for $20. They threw her out on the street, and she got run over by a bus. And I remember it vividly because it was on a Friday night, and we were in a backlog, and I usually didn't answer calls like that, but there was nobody around to answer the call, so I picked it up because I was only a couple blocks away. When I got to the scene, a couple foot patrol officers were there, and they were taking care of the woman, and I was told that the boys fled in her car into Prospect Park in Brooklyn. So I immediately went into the park, and I saw the vehicle, and I got out with Nero. Now, mind you, I was in plain clothes, and Nero picked up the track immediately. And about 5 minutes into the track, into the woods, I started to see muzzle flash and gunfire, and I realized that one of the boys, I didn't know at that point, they started shooting at me, and they could see me, because behind me was all kinds of lights and background, and I was looking into a dark area. So I returned fire. And within a minute or so, there was no more fire, and Nero was already gone, going after the other boy, who happened to climb up a tree, and he stayed in a tree. When it was all said and done and I received all my backup, we found out that the young boy that I shot that was 16, I shot and killed him. They found him, and the other boy that was hanging in a tree, they ended up trying to apprehend him, and while he tried to get away, he jumped from the tree onto a fence. And in Prospect Park, there was a zoo, a Brooklyn Zoo, and we had wrought iron bars going up, and they were like 15 feet tall, and they curved at a 45-degree angle, and he jumped, and two of the bars went right through his chest. He didn't make it. He ended up not dying, but he had severe injuries. That really bothered me at that point the next day, because I realized, after going to internal affairs and being cleared of the incident, I realized that my actions, I took a life away of a 16-year-old boy who was trying to kill me. And I understand that they usually say the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree, meaning most of the time they have dysfunctional families and it's in a bad area, that they're going to turn up, the young kids are going to turn up bad. They're going to turn out bad. In his case, that wasn't the case, though. His mom was a nurse and his dad was a school teacher. And he had an older brother, 17, that was already in prison for armed robbery. So it was safe to assume in his case that the environment played a large role in his demeanor, in his life, and he took a wrong turn. I got 7 days off for that, had to go see the department psychiatrist, and because of that, that's one of the reasons I have nightmares, because I keep reliving that over and over again. I keep second-guessing myself and asking myself, could I have done things differently? Mm-hmm. And the answer to that, obviously, is no, because he was shooting at me, and I was a better shot than he was, and I put a stop to that. So that was a real bad situation. Let me see. I'm trying to think. That was about it. That was it for that.
And what were some of your scariest?
Some of the background on that young boy was he was a drug addict and he also was a drug dealer. The reason why he committed that armed robbery in the liquor store was to support his habit.
For $20?
Excuse me?
He did that for $20?
Sometimes you don't know how much money is in a cash register, and you'll do anything you can for a quick fix. That's why today, when you have arguments with, we're not going to make this political, but when you say the left and the right, the left wants to legalize narcotics. The right does not want to legalize narcotics. The bottom line is marijuana is a gateway to all narcotics. It's a gateway to the drug world. And what happens is everybody says marijuana is not that bad. But you don't wake up one day doing crack or coke or LSD or shooting heroin if you've never done drugs before. You start at the bottom and you work your way up. Once you get hooked, you have to support your habit. And if you legalize it and they become hooked, who ends up paying for this to support their habit? The government does. Who is the government? We are. Taxpayers' dollars. So in my case, you can't legalize it. You can't support the habit. You have to try to police it and do away with it and educate. You got to try to educate the kids. And that's an important thing. But with education, and if they know how bad drugs can be and how they will turn out, most likely they'll make the right decision in life and to avoid drug usage at all costs.
I agree with that. And what was one of the scariest moments on the job?
One of the scariest moments, I think, was after about almost a year and a half of working on a drug case. We were actually given the green light from a judge to do what they call a no-knock warrant, and that warrant was in South Jamaica, Queens. And a no-knock warrant means you have to do it at a specific date and at a specific time. We prepared for this warrant for almost a week after the judge gave us the okay to go. While executing this warrant, the drug dealers that were in the apartment were all tipped off. They were 4 Jamaicans, Rastafarians. And as we were getting ready to go through the door, and at this point in time, right before you go through the door, there were 6 of us in Organized Crime Control Bureau. We have full body armor. We're getting ready to go through the door. Your adrenaline is really running because you know what to expect and you know what could possibly happen. Well, they started shooting before we went through the door. And all 4 of these men were the intelligence that came back to us from another UC was that these guys were known as captains. They were high-ranking drug dealers. My unit and I returned fire, killing all of the 4 suspects. This took place in 1989, and it was later determined through ballistics that one of the suspects died from bullet wounds from my weapon. Just one. Several of us, including me, were shot, and the body armor stopped a lot of the injuries. But from being shot, you get what they call blunt trauma. And we were being rushed to the hospital. And on the way to the hospital, as you know, from this point on, I was in a really bad car accident. And that's when both my knees, moreover my left knee, hit the dash, and it shattered. And that night I went into surgery. And the next day when I woke up, this was St. Mary's Immaculate Hospital in South Jamaica, Queens. My wife was there, my mom, my mother-in-law, plus all my friends, my supervisors. And little did I know, at that point in time, that was my career-ending line-of-duty injury. So your next question was, why did I retire? I was retired due to the injuries I sustained while working. I was then a detective, and I was a few weeks away from being made sergeant. This is called a line-of-duty injury. And my retirement consists of full pay, full benefits for myself and my family for the rest of my life.
Wow. And after you retired, why did you become a teacher?
That's a good question. That's a great question. I became a teacher because I decided that in this point in my life I wanted to really make a difference. You asked me on question 1, why did I become a police officer? To protect and serve, and to make a difference, and for job security. Well, I felt that if becoming a teacher, several things could happen. And instead of putting people in jail, I could try to prevent people from going to jail. I also mentioned to you omnipresence. When you were a police officer, you can be a deterrent, but there's no way to measure that amount of good that you can do. As a teacher, you are measured by your students' performances. In other words, when you get your students at the beginning of the year, you influence them, you educate them, and when you release them at the end of the year, hopefully they all advance within the school system. You can actually see and measure their success. And by measuring their success, you know yourself that you did a good job. The years I taught, I really enjoyed it. And the reason that I stopped was because of medical reasons. And as you know, I've had 33 knee surgeries. So during teaching, it seemed like almost every year I was having a surgery. And when I had surgery, I was out for 3.5, 4 months. Now the school district has to pay a sub. I'm doing all the lesson plans at home. I meet with the parents. It's confusing to the students, and it wasn't fair. It wasn't fair to the district, the parents, the students, and it wasn't fair to myself. So at that point, I had to resign. I have a couple students. One of them is finishing up med school right now. He was the only black kid that I had when I had him in 2nd grade in 1996. About 3 years ago, his mom contacted your Aunt Deb, because she still teaches. And his mom asked if I would write him a recommendation because he was going to the University of Florida in Gainesville and he was trying to get into med school. So I called the parents and I told his mom I would gladly write him a recommendation. However, it would be better coming from a high school teacher or some of his professors at the UF. And his mom was adamant and said that I was his favorite teacher. I pushed him, I was fair, and he always thought out of all his teachers I was his favorite teacher. So I wrote him a recommendation, and he's now in his last year in med school at University of Gainesville. I have another student that's a Navy aviator, and he flies an F-14 Hornet. So I did do some good along the way. And like I said, it's a very rewarding profession. And just knowing that you helped and formulated somebody's life and set them on the path of success is gratifying. And to me, that was very important.
Now, can you compare and contrast being a police officer and a teacher?
Sure. The similarities of a police officer and a teacher are sometimes pretty similar. You're in both professions, you're serving the public, you're protecting the public, and you're also educating the public. Both of these professions, you as a teacher or a police officer, are held to a much higher standard of personal conduct and personal morals. Teachers are responsible for their actions within the classroom and out of the classroom. And in both professions, you're there to protect and to serve and to keep the peace, and like I said, to educate. You're known as a public servant. In retrospect, the jobs are very similar, and in both professions, you can be looked at as mentors. The contrasting issues pertaining to police officers versus teachers, as I mentioned before, as a teacher, you can be measured by your students' successes. As a police officer, it's very hard to measure the amount of success you had. Even if you were in a neighborhood and crime stats were kept, remember, you're only in the neighborhood a certain amount of time and only 8 hours a day. So it is very hard to measure. As a teacher, you're in your classroom 180 days a year. You're teaching 8 hours a day. So you're with the same students all year long. So you can actually measure and see the differences that you can do with your students when they leave your classroom. Let me see. As far as personal safety, on a contrast, you're much safer as a teacher than you are a police officer. And that's a fact. Although, in some cases today, not so much anymore, because as you know, society is getting more and more violent and there's more and more shootings in schools. As a whole, though, you are safer as a teacher. As a police officer, every time I left work, I would kiss Debbie and my son goodbye, and in the back of my mind, I always wondered if I ever was going to see them again. So the stress factor as a police officer really takes its toll on you. The reverse is also true for the family member, and you and I had this discussion when your friend was going on the police department, remember?
Yes.
The federal wildlife. As a wife, as a spouse, as a family member, the stress is also on you all, because every time you would kiss your husband or boyfriend or father goodbye, you would wonder in your mind, is this the last time I'm ever going to see him? So the stress rate was there. The other part, the contrast, is divorce rate is very high in law enforcement. And it is the demanding nature of the job. And then there's one very important stat, and most people don't know this. When a police officer retires, depending on the agency he works at, the lifespan of retirement could be anywhere from 4 to 7 years. That's the average now. That's not, I'm an exception because I retired early, but that's the average. When a teacher retires, the stats show that the lifespan of a teacher can be anywhere from 12 to 25 years. And remember, that also is just an average. Those are the differences.
And do you have any advice to give me as a future teacher?
Oh, I have lots of advice.
Well, let's hear it.
First thing, it's really important. You're not going to see each and every student that you teach and succeed in life, but you will see a good portion of them succeed. Don't take it personally. This is very important to remember. Leave your job at the job. I did this while I was a police officer, while I was a detective, and while I was a teacher. Don't bring your job home with you. By bringing it home, I mean letting it bother you at home to where it's going to affect the people that you live with, or reside with, or care about. If that happens, you're doomed for failure. That's really important. Also, understand that you're a teacher. Again, you teach 180 days a year. You're with your students 8 hours a day. Your students leave your classroom. You're responsible for them in your class. You're not responsible for them out of your class. more than half of your class that you will acquire when you become a teacher will probably come from dysfunctional families, i.e. divorces, you name it. It's there. Out of that half, a third of them might be on some kind of medication, i.e. Ritalin for ADD, ADHD. So as a teacher, you too will go through a lot of stress. There will be children that you will not be able to educate, to move them the way you would want to see that you move them. You can only do the best you can. We all make mistakes. You learn from them, you move on. Again, don't take it personally. The unfortunate part about this, and this will take its toll on you, as it does every other teacher, and you can ask Aunt Deb, you can ask Aunt Linda, Uncle Theron, you're going to be measured by every student that crosses your path, and that's the way we're going today. Unfortunately, teachers are under a spotlight, and we in the United States have to educate everybody from the profound to the gifted. In other countries, we always hear this. China, Japan, all other countries, Switzerland, they have a higher success rate. Their students do better than the United States, and I can tell you why, and it's true. They only educate the cream of the crop. That's why they have higher scores. We have to educate everybody, and everybody will be measured and averaged into your evaluation. So when they say today that they want the teachers to be measured by their successes in life, it really could be a deterrent, because one year you could have a class with a bunch of underachievers. Well, if they're underachievers, they're never going to achieve as far as the goals that you set and the district set. Well, it's going to come back and make you look bad. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think somewhere along the line our Congress has to differentiate when they make these laws as far as evaluating teachers, that they have to be able to determine and evaluate the students that can be measured should be measured. The students that cannot be measured should not hurt the teacher in any way, shape, or form. So, well, again, what my point to you is try not to take things personally, although you will. We all did, but you have to try not to, and you have to move on. You will touch a lot of lives, and I always thought that teaching, the two most important days was the first day and the last day. The first day you got your students, and it was great. And then the last day, most of the students are moving on to a higher grade. And the reason they're moving on to the higher grade is because of your teaching techniques. And in there should be enough gratification for you to understand why that teaching profession, to me, I think it is the most noble profession. It's more noble than law enforcement, because without a teacher, you can't have another teacher. Without a teacher, you can't have a lawyer, a doctor, a police officer, or anybody else in the world that holds any kind of a profession. You've had to be taught it. May necessarily were not taught by a IE teacher, but you were taught by somebody who taught you had to do something. That's why teachers are really, really important.
Well, thank you, Uncle Joe, for taking time out of your busy day and the Yankees game to do this interview with me. I love you very much.
I love you too. Good luck. Let me know how it turns out.
Thank you.